here for our second webinar with the Self-Management Institute. My name is Amy Wardell, and this is my colleague, Ron Kawa.
Hello.
Last time we talked about the CLOU, or Colleague Letter of Understanding. We mostly talked about the philosophy and the elements that go into a CLOU. Today we're going to talk about CLOU systems. So what we use to disperse the information in the CLOU out to the enterprise. And we're in good hands because Ron has developed the CLOU systems that we have and spent his time at Morningstar digitizing that information.
Right. Well, for speed, we have quite a few slides we want to go through, screenshots of the application. We'll talk a little bit about different pieces of it and why we use it, but we'll try to get through it as quickly as possible so that way we can get to questions and get to other things. So right now, we'll switch over to the presentation and we'll go from there. Let's see. There we go. All right. So the CLOU system. CLOU is our colleague letter of understanding. It's a way in which we communicate or record what our commitments are to each other and to the company. As we go through this, we're also having an area, and Amy will be monitoring the Twitter or by email any questions you may have, and we'll try to answer them either through the presentation as they come up or any other time, or we'll wait till the end, whichever works out. But please feel free. This is a dialogue as much as we can here on what we're doing. So briefly in review, there was a previous webinar, the SMI CLOU webinar, which talked about CLOU as a concept, the colleague letter of understanding. It covered the personal commercial mission, people's responsibilities and the activities they perform within the company and for each other. Talked briefly about CLOU colleagues, a colleague's personal development. We won't get into the details of that, but just wanted to cover that basically because we're going to use some of this terminology through today's webinar. Some new concepts that we'll want to cover in today. One is a concept of a business unit. This is real similar, how I would describe it, real similar to what a lot of people use for departments. But the difference with us is that we actually have revenue as expenses, and there are P&Ls. An actual profit and loss for these departments or business units. So they can see revenue, they can make good business decisions rather than just be simply a cost center. And we'll talk about business units and its in place inside the CLOU. Stepping stones. Basically they're a KPI, they're an indicator of performance. As people have responsibilities and activities, it's important for them to know in a self-managed environment how well they're doing. And the stepping stone is key to that. It's a measurement of how well are you performing the commitment that you have, the activity that you committed to, or the responsibility that you have. Since you don't have a boss necessarily telling you what's right, what's wrong, where you're going from, even though your colleagues will keep you accountable, it's important to know with a stepping stone. We talk about baseball sometimes and other sports analogies. One would be, let's say, with baseball, a batter that gets up there and only gets on base, perhaps, and makes a hit 3 out of every 10 times they're at bat, might think that they're a terrible batter, so they're batting .350. Well, unless you have the context of the other people that are performing similar to that, you would have no idea that this is a Hall of Fame batter in baseball. So it's really important not just to have it by yourself, but also have stepping stones within context, understanding with other colleagues and other people doing similar functions. The other thing is without a boss, what you have is you must know what is perfect. The concept of perfection with a stepping stone is critical because unless you've hit perfection, it's the perfect number, then you still have room for improvement. So we never settle on just some arbitrary goal that somebody has set for you. You need to be at 30% efficiency or 70% efficiency or 10% increase in revenue or whatever the case is. Those things, unless you've hit and the perfect number, it's infinity or it's zero or absolute. You always have something to work for. But sometimes looking at purely perfection can be difficult, and it's kind of daunting and way out there. So what we have is a concept within a stepping stone of people that set their own near-term targets. It's a short-term target you set in your stepping stone, and then once you've hit it, then you're always saying, okay, well, what's my new target? You know, if I can do 5 units per hour, well, can I do 5.5? Can I do 6 units per hour until I can get to perfect, which would be way out there. Now, perfect, also a quick example of that, let's use another sports analogy, would be in golf. So if we're doing 18 holes of golf, and Tiger Woods or one of the other players out there, what is a perfect round of golf for 18 would be a hole-in-one on every hole. So the perfect score is 18 on 18 holes of golf. Well, until you've hit a hole-in-one in every round and everything you're doing, you always have room for improvement. It's not just saying I'm going to be better than par or some of these other settings that some arbitrary person or somebody out there has gone for. So that's the concept of stepping stones and the perfection. Briefly, history about CLOU itself. It started off pretty much as a paper letter, a colleague letter of understanding, introduced back in '96 when Chris Roofer had put and the group then was trying to solidify and write down their commitments to each other and what was happening. So, but the difficulty with that was that it was on paper, people were signing it, and it was put in a binder and set aside. And when you're in the same facility, it's pretty easy to walk up to a book and open it up if you wanted to do it. And you knew the 20 or 10 or 15 other people that were around there in your facility. But as we expanded and got more facilities and got more widespread throughout the state of California and even beyond, it was difficult to say, well, what is that person's CLOU? What is their commitment? And sometimes it was never even reviewed or looked at except for once a year when we said, hey, are our commitments the same? Yes, let's go ahead and go from there. So in 2007, I was hired and brought on, and my mission is to provide all colleagues ready access to all company CLOUs and key stepping stones through the development of effective information systems. So what does that mean? I try to put in the systems and processes in place that allow us to make it very public and very easy to access. So what we did is we took these spreadsheets or these pieces of paper and we basically turned it into our first version of CLOU. The issue with that was it was great. You could see everybody's CLOU, you could see their mission, you could see all the commitments, but it was really just like a spreadsheet. You could hand type whatever you wanted in there, and there was no way of interconnecting one person with another or seeing if there were commitments between areas that were falling through the cracks. There were activities or responsibilities we couldn't easily see where we stood, but at least it was visible to everybody in the company. So what we have now come up with is the new CLOU system, and that's what we're going to go through. As a quick reminder, again, here are the sites for any questions if you have them as we go through here. Amy is diligently looking through there and seeing what your questions are, and we'll go through. So let's talk about CLOU. The new CLOU system, the application, what we've done is we've created a dashboard, more interactive, very integrated system. It's web-based. And just from a quick view, if we look at this, the very just title bar of this, and we'll go through the various tabs, it has the person's name, the colleague letter of understanding, you see all the emblems, and then it has their personal commercial mission. And I'm sorry you can't quite see that very well because of the graininess, but right there in that blue section in white is that person's personal commercial mission. Then you have a home tab, a process architecture, and a profile. So we'll start with the profile. What does the profile really provide us? The profile is really a synopsis of this particular individual. If we look a little bit closer, of course you see my great mug there, you'll see John Smith, and that's not my name, but we just dropped it in there, their colleague number, their email, what facility do they work at, what's their contact and cell number, male, female, and then we have what's their primary business unit. Now, primary because there's no restriction in our company that says I can't work in this business unit and I have commitments in these other business units, but generally there's a primary one that you work in. This example of John Smith is he works in the distribution business unit. So then we'll zoom in a little closer and we can see, okay, part of the profile is their personal commercial mission. This is where we can put this in there. Their committed work schedule, so in season or out of season, maybe there's differences. For this particular one, we're talking about 40 to 50 hours during the off season, and in season maybe 50 to 60 hours. This is where we're solidifying, and I'm broadcasting to everybody, this is my commitment. Next one is my resources requirements. What do I need to be able to be successful in my job? What kind of resources do I need? The next one is my short-term development goals or my short-term goals within the company. Maybe I want to learn some more skills or I want to do some things, but also what's my long-term goal? Just to sit here and just to do a job, we're always pushing, and we always push ourselves to try and say, what is the next thing for my own perfection, to get better as a colleague, to get better as a person? What's my short-term goal and what's my long-term goal? So that way we don't get stuck in, it's just the day-to-day. We look beyond just the moment of what we're in. That's the basic profile. The next piece is we'll get into the process architecture. So what's the process architecture? It's kind of our way of saying this is the basics of what our responsibilities and activities are. I sure hope that's coming out a lot clearer than what it appears to be right now on this. What this is kind of a grid form. It's a tree, and this very root level is actually all the business units within the company. What we're trying to do is we try to say, okay, instead of having separate spreadsheets all over the place, we have every activity and every responsibility within the enterprise defined in here. And everybody can now click and commit to any particular section or part in all this area. We can see that there's a green section next to distribution, hopefully you can read that, and another lower one, green and evaporation. This particular colleague, John Smith, has commitments or has accepted and committed to doing things within the distribution area and then also in the evaporation area. So if we dig a little bit closer and get in a little deeper, we can see, definitely I can see that this is a little clearer. We can see that distribution has many responsibilities inside there. There's production support, shipping, warehouse maintenance, administration. Beyond that, we can continue to dig deeper and deeper into here and until we find the particular section that says, okay, John has checked and he's committed to unloading bin parts, grading bin parts, storing bin parts, and recording bin part returns. So John is saying, this is what I'm committing to do. We can also see that he has, if we were to dig deeper, we'd see there's probably something, at least one thing in shipping, within the warehouse maintenance, administration, and again, down below, there's something in evaporation. While that's in another business unit, there is no restriction from getting involved and having commitments if it fits within your mission. To say, yeah, I'm committed to that. Maybe something in evaporation because he's a forklift driver and they need things moved around the place or deliveries, or maybe he's part of the maintenance crew that's over there during the off season or in season. There are activities that he's committed to over there. So this gives us a feel for everything that's happening. Now, part of this also is, well, how do these things get into the architecture? Anybody can create or modify the process architecture in any particular business unit in any section. So if I feel there's something missing or a new activity that needs to be in there, a new responsibility, or something's not in enough detail, I can go ahead and create a particular piece or modify the process architecture. In that, we have the name of that particular activity. Then we have a brief description of what does this really mean? And then out of that, out of all the stepping stones that are in the system, and at this point we're filtered just to show the distribution stuff, what stepping stones would help us to determine that we are being successful in completing this particular activity? Because what we're trying to do is get feedback. We're trying to see the information. If a stepping stone doesn't exist here, and it's not here, a colleague can request or go ahead and hit the bottom left and say, hey, add a stepping stone. And it would create a stepping stone, it would drop it into the distribution, and then us in IT, we would go looking for that and then try to ask some more information about what's the sources for the information, how do we get this inside the CLOU. So anybody can do this. Now, some questions will come up. So if we're looking in a little bit more detail, we've selected the unload bin parts, we can see which stepping stones actually have been triggered to show up that are the measurement for this one. Now on the left, on the process architecture in that tree, you'll notice there's little check boxes and then unchecked boxes. That's where I'm actually stating, or John has stated, this is what I'm committing to. If you look on the right side next to the stepping stone, there's another little checkbox. That basically says, hey, I want to see, I want to watch this stepping stone. So being committed to an activity, I have the option of whether or not I want to monitor and track that particular stepping stone on my dashboard. I can also watch any stepping stone without being committed to the activity, because maybe I've done a system, I've put something in place, or I'm very interested in what's going on there. I'm not committing to the completion of the activity, but I want to see the measurement. I want to see that KPI showing up for me. So that's why we have these two different sections for the checkboxes, one next to the particular stepping stone. So we can see the stepping stones that have been associated with this particular activity. If we go a little farther, actually zooming in a little better, we can see that little checkbox that I was talking about. That means I want to watch this stepping stone. If I go to the colleague tab, this tells me every colleague that has actually committed to this activity. So here's where our other system didn't tie this in. There was no way I could see a particular activity and see how many people were committed and what locations they were. So we've got 2 people that are in Liberty and 2 people at our Los Banos facility that are committed to this particular activity. You'll also know there's little green guys next to it. We'll get into what that is. That's basically a CLOU relationship, but we'll talk about that. That emblem is all over the place. Now, we talked about the fact that anybody can change or add something to the process architecture. Typical next question, and what we wrote into this system was, what if somebody makes a change? I don't want them changing what my commitment was. Well, we have something called a proposed edit. If there are people that are already committed to an activity or responsibility in there, whether you want to add a stepping stone, remove it, you want to rename that particular one, you want to change that architecture, that would in turn change their commitment. So what we've created is this concept of a proposed edit. While you can make a change, if nobody's committed to it, it becomes permanent in the system. If there are commitments by colleagues, they then have to review that commitment and agree or disagree to the change, because that, in a sense, is changing their commitment. So if we go over to the proposed edit, we can see that Jane Doe proposed adding bin parts sorted per total bin part labor hour as a stepping stone that helps to determine that unloading bin parts was actually being successfully done. Now, I have the choice, since I'm committed to this, John Smith being me, I can either affirm it or decline it. There's also a little view button that lets you see what everybody's vote is. This is not to replace the one-on-one communication. Obviously, we're not saying, well, I put a proposed in it, and it's been there for 2 days, 3 days. Pick up the phone, call. Hopefully, these are things that people will understand and they know about. There's also a section that the system will alert, and we'll get to that page. But any kind of proposed edit or change, it's important that the people affected are notified by the system that, hey, there's a proposed change out there. Otherwise, what it equates to having a telephone with no ringer. You know, you constantly be picking up the phone trying to see if there was a call, and odds are you're going to miss one. Or you're just going to have the ringer, you know, you're going to have the phone to your ear all the time hoping that somebody's calling you. You've got to have that ringer. You've got to have something that notifies you. And so the proposed edit shows up here, but then it will also go ahead and show up in some of the alerts. If we step out from here, we briefly went through the process architecture. We can take it to the next step, which is our main home page. So when you launch CLOU, at the beginning we showed the banner way up at the top. We can see that there's many sections to this. This is your home page. This are the stepping stones you're watching. It shows you the updates, CLOU colleagues. We'll get into each of those little pieces here as we move along. Trying to make sure I don't lose my place here. Okay, so let's go into the My Updates. Remember we talked about that process architecture change that the system's going to go ahead and alert you. Well, that's where the My Updates are. John Smith has updates. It says, hey, Janet Jones has made a change. do you want to, go ahead and review it and approve the change now, or whatever the case is? You can actually click on that link of review, approve the change now, and it'll drop you right into that section of the process architecture. You don't have to go hunting for it. It'll drop you right into that section. You can review it and go ahead and affirm or decline it. I also know that Janet Jones, her name's underlined. Any place that you see a colleague's name, you can click on that and it will go to their CLOU. You can't modify their CLOU, but you can view their profile, you can view their dashboards, what they're seeing. You can also see their process architecture and all their commitments. So anytime you see a name, you can do that. There's also other features of hovering over it. It gives you their picture, their mission, so you don't necessarily have to go to their CLOU, but you can get a synopsis of what their phone number is, those kind of things. The next piece is our CLOU colleagues. CLOU colleagues is the relationships that we've solidified with each other. So in this particular case, John Smith is a CLOU colleague with Greg Gaines, John Doe, and Janet Jones. You can see this by the little green guys right next to it. It's saying, hey, these people are confirmed CLOU colleagues. One has reached out to the other, and the other one has confirmed. So CLOU colleagues are the key people that you have made commitments to and you work with. You want to be real careful with this because for myself, okay, as Ron Calla, I provide CLOUs to everybody in our enterprise. This is the software. I have a commitment to do this. That doesn't mean 300 or 400 people are my CLOU colleagues. These are the ones that you're tightly knit with, that you work frequently with. It's kind of a gray thing. If you're looking for a clear definition, we've got a couple things out there, but it's really to link up who these people are. At the end of the year, these are the people that you're going to do 360 evaluation with. These are the people you work constantly. Amy is a CLOU colleague of mine. Paul Green Jr. is a CLOU colleague of mine. These are people that I work with continually. In this particular case, I happen to be a CLOU colleague with this gentleman, John Smith. But you'll also notice here that on Ron Calla there, one guy's green and the other guy's gray. The little guy that's closest to the name represents that person. That's kind of his little avatar on the screen. So Ron Calla has initiated a commitment and said, hey, I think we're CLOU colleagues, let's go ahead and solidify this. But you'll see the other one is gray. Well, that represents John Smith. John has not confirmed that we are CLOU colleagues. But during this interim process of this negotiation or discussion, or this attempt for me to reach out and try and friend him, so to speak, is this gray. He can still see my alerts. He can still see there's one alert out there that's on mine. There's 6 for Janet. There's 2 for Jane. But there's not a commitment there.
You might want to talk about the alert numbers a little bit. What those
triggers? That's a good point. The triggers there, if I were to look at Greg Gaines, there's 5. There are 5 unread events that have happened in Greg Gaines. Greg may have changed his commitment. He may have changed his work commitment. He may have changed what he is currently committed to. So he's either accepted a new responsibility or he's gotten rid of a responsibility. It's a way for you to see what are the events that happen in the system. Maybe he changed his mission. Well, that might be something really important if part of his mission was critical for me in completing mine. So changes that happen in the system become alerts, and there may be 20, 30, 40 alerts underneath the Greg Gaines. If I were to click on Greg, it would expand, but the 5 unread that I have not looked at yet would be at the top. And that's what it's signifying. There have been 5 changes to Greg's CLOU in some form or another that are of interest to me that I want to take a look at. So it's our way to look at it. The other thing is there's this little spot that's a magnifying glass, that's a search button. I can go search with that. I can go search anybody that's out there in the system and in the CLOU. I can click on that, find that colleague, and jump immediately to their CLOU. So I don't necessarily, how do I find people? I don't have to go hunting. It's not a treasure, map that finding, hey, well, maybe he's committed to something over here, I'll find him. You just hit that search button. You can add him as a CLOU colleague or just jump straight over to their CLOU site. Now, this CLOU, this relationship, in many organizations, you have an org chart. So if I were to look at this, we had somebody from, I believe it was UC Davis, take a look at our CLOU commitments, our CLOU colleague commitments, and came across, and they mapped it. And what this is this is a representation of our organizational chart. These are all the individuals and how many commitments they have to other colleagues. These are CLOU colleague connections. And the different colors represent different facilities, whether it be Liberty, Los Banos, and you can see how it crosses over. You've got some people that are way out on the outskirts, they have 1 or 2 CLOU colleagues. You can see some others may have 8, 10, 12. Typically 8 to 10 is about the normal commitment, but if you've got no CLOU colleagues, that means you have no agreements and you have no commitments to other colleagues. It's kind of an odd thing. Either you haven't updated your CLOU, or what are you doing here? You know, who are you doing? Are you just out there working on your own, but not for anybody or with anybody? It's kind of an odd thing to have out there. But if we were to put an org chart together, this is what I kind of would equate to our org chart. Okay, the dashboard. Here is the cool thing about what we've done with this. What we've done is we've got a BI tool here that before with the other system, whether it be paper or the other kind of database version, people self-reported. It's going back to the baseball, it's kind of like a baseball player that's keeping track of his own stats while he's playing. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to become statisticians that are now broadcasting these numbers so the colleagues spend more time actually analyzing the numbers and seeing the numbers than having to spend the time actually collecting all the data. And what we've done is we've graphically represented. You can change, in this particular case, we're looking at the bin parts for John. These are the important ones. And across the top of the bar, underneath the word dashboard, you can see that there is a bar that goes along there. That's really a timeline. It's really a timeline that floats across this piece here. What you can do is say, hey, I want to see it at a 10-year, I want to take it down to a 2-year, I want to see it 3 months, 1 month, 7-day, whatever the time granularity might be in there. And then this whole screen would turn around and change and give us a better presentation of that particular data. In this case, we can see the trends. Also, the other lines, the individual lines you see here, are the different facilities. So it turns out we've got 3 of the facilities here, and they are Liberty, Los Banos, and Williams, and we know that because it says all. The other thing is the enterprise. So the 4th line is actually an average of all of them together. So it says, okay, this one business unit, this one measurement, is being performed at 3 facilities, but what's the averages overall? And if John had some individual data, he'd be able to see a line for him, and that would be John's data relative to all the sites and then also the enterprise. So again, we're trying to push and broadcast this data. Now any of these stepping stones are completely visible. This is basically off of John's commitments. But if I hit the watch stepping stones, I can change the business unit and review any business unit, and I can click on any particular stepping stone to be able to say, hey, I want to watch this one, I want to watch this one. Again, it's just like the process architecture. I'm not committing to the activity. I'm just saying, hey, I want this up on my dashboard. This is that total transparency and visibility concept we have here, is that I can get involved and I can see and I can watch any stepping stone that's out there. There is no barrier of, hey, this isn't your department, go stay in your own area. Because of these other concepts we have of total responsibility and other things, it's important that we have visibility to all this data. We put this tool in so that way it's faster, easier than trying to hunt it down in the process architecture to say, where could they have linked this to an activity? I want to be able to see it. And that can be for any one of the business units that's out there. The other piece is from the dashboard, we can turn around and, so this was the watch stepping stone was here. We can see we're currently in dashboard, that's the one that's red. And then there's this other button over here that's called grid. So if I were to go to the grid, what it basically does is take all that dashboard information and show it kind of in a spreadsheet columnar basis. I can even get to the point, if I wanted to, I could turn around and just go ahead and click the Excel button. It'll take this sheet, copy it completely over into Excel, open up Excel, and now I can create my own charts, I can manipulate, I can do what-ifs without necessarily changing the data. Oh, there was another little nuance to CLOU, which was really important with the old version. everybody was self-reporting, but there was the same number. So you had multiple versions of the truth. And it's not necessarily somebody being deceitful. It's like somebody rounded before they did the calculation, and somebody did the calculation and rounded after. Sometimes that can affect the outcome. But at least now when we're looking at a number, that is the one number, and everybody's looking at the same instance of that particular number. So that's the grid view. And we come out to here. Okay, so we're in CLOU. We've seen all these pieces. We've got this nice stuff here, but it's still a little disjointed. What if I want to see, or at the end of the year, I want to print a report for my compensation letter that goes along with everything of all my stepping stones and my commitments, and I want to be able to see it. Or maybe I want to see Amy's or John's. I want to see everything together, all their commitments, stepping stones, what their mission is, their personal development. What we've created is there's actually this little printer here. Whoops. And of course, by hovering over it, it changes my little... There's a printer there, and what that does is if I go ahead and print, it will actually bring up a report that gives me a lot more detail. It shows John, it shows when it was printed, the mission, all the commitments. You can then see up to 10 years worth of annual data. So in this particular case, we're talking about 2004 to 2013. It gives you a little spark line, so I can see all the commitments and all the data right there in the locations that he's committed to. I can also see his work schedule, his commitments. So in a particular document, depending on how much they've committed to in the process architecture, depends on how many pages you are. And then there's another page that also shows you all their CLOU colleagues and their confirmed CLOU colleagues that are going through. So in this case, that next sheet would show the 3 or 4 people that are confirmed CLOU colleagues. I would not show up on this report because remember, I initiated with John Smith, but he did not confirm that relationship. So I would not show up as one of the confirmed CLOU colleagues in this particular report. Okay, so tried to move through this as quickly as possible, and I realized we probably went really fast, but we had a lot of slides. That pretty much concludes the CLOU presentation, or the portion that says, hey, here's what our CLOU software is. And now we'd really like to hear from you. Any particular questions, we could go back and review something in more detail or a little slower, however you want to do it.
Okay. Well, I think one question that people typically have is that, you mentioned any colleague can request a stepping stone, and then it gets sent off to you, to IT, to complete the collection of data to put that stepping stone together. So what does that process look like after a colleague requests a stepping stone?
One of the things we tried to do is along with the stepping stones, is we wanted to make sure there was a way that we could record and we could have not only people's commitments, but how is this stepping stone calculated? What is it? How does it work? So what we did is inside CLOU, every stepping stone has in it sections or pieces of data that we found to be important for any particular stepping stone. And we can make this list available, and it's not exhaustive. It continues to evolve as we realize we want more depth or more detail. But if we were to, let's go back in here. That's right, I have to click on this time. Okay. Okay, so if I zoom in a little bit, I can see the basics of the particular stepping stone. I can see who's requesting it, what's its purpose, should we publish it, is it a stepping stone? The concept of that is a stepping stone is a measurable, it's a ratio, it's something. There's also other data that goes in the system. If I wanted to say total loads shipped per day, it's really not a target. There's not too much of a target, a near-term target, but it's contextual. It's important to see what my volume is going through. So technically, it's not a true stepping stone. So this is more of an attribute that we have in there. The other thing we want to see is, let's take a look at stepping stone details. I hope this is coming out a lot clearer than what it appears to be here. Is what's the time granularity? What's the lowest? Do we want it to the day level? Do we want it the week, the month level? What's the levels of detail? Do we want to see at the location, the colleague level, only up at the high level of the enterprise? And if you want it by location, which locations should have data? what business units would we like it to show up in? So when we go to watch a stepping stone and we're in the process architecture and we're filtering, we can actually, so nobody's having to look at all 700 stepping stones that are in, or 650. You can just turn around and say, I only want to see the ones that have been set up primarily for distribution. So this is where you would set that up, is what business units do you want to filter off of. Things like how is it calculated, those kind of things are in here. We also have in the data warehouse. So the CLOU is a data warehouse. How many pieces of data are there? What format? Is it a percent? Is it a number? Is it currency? How many digits to the decimal place? What type of year? Are we collecting this when we're looking at it on an annual basis? Is it fiscal year? Is it calendar year? Is it pack year? What kind of year when we're really talking about year? If the data represents a week, is it week ending or week beginning? How often do you want to update? This data should be updated daily, or this should be updated weekly or monthly or yearly. Those kind of things. Are there data that we can go ahead and grab from someplace else? And then we also have just some development stuff. Is it being automated? Is it not? If it is, how's it being automated? Those kind of things. So we have all kinds of details about the particular stepping stone. The next piece is the data entry. How can we do that? Well, for any particular stepping stones, there's a data entry tab, and I can physically say for this location or person at this time granularity, and I can physically hand type this data in. And in some cases, because there's no automated system, it's actually on a piece of paper that it's recorded, we actually have to hand type this data in. Or it's in somebody's spreadsheet or someplace else that's not immediately accessible to us, or we haven't gotten around yet to doing the automation piece. We want to have the mechanism to be able to hand type in. This is a SQL database, to get into a little geeky stuff in the background. It's SQL. We're using .NET technology on the front end. So being SQL, anything that you can do within SQL, if you can link to it, if you can automate it, if you can bring it out of another SQL database or an Access database, or even a spreadsheet if it's organized a certain way, I can go ahead and bring the data and do it automatically or automate it in some fashion. But we do have this data entry piece here.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I know we had one comment on Twitter about asking if the Prezi was available on the Self-Management Institute site, because I think people were having issues viewing it, unfortunately.
Yeah. It looks great on our screen, but it didn't present well on Hangout.
I did just post a link to it on Twitter, so you can go find the presentation and hopefully look through it. We don't have any other questions at the moment, so
it sounds like we must have done a really good job, or they just are overwhelmed and awed by the system that they just don't know what to say. We are available. We wanted to present this. It's a tool, but it also talks a little bit about what our system is and how we try to communicate information, and how people record and solidify their commitments not only to the company and the enterprise, but also to each other. So in this format, we now have complete visibility, and it's an evolving thing. We have new things that we want to do, new ways of presenting and organizing the dashboard, new ways of importing or exporting data, and we're continually looking at ways to record and get more of the process architecture matured. We had this created and built, we had it outsourced. We went live back in November of 2012, and so there's a lot of what I call feeding the monster. We are constantly looking and feeding more data and doing more automation, and perfection will be when 100% of all CLOUs are reported at 100% of the requested time granularities and 100% of the levels of detail. And so that's a pretty daunting task, but we feel that we're making great strides and we're heading there. And hopefully you found this useful. And if you have any other questions, you know how to get a hold of Amy. Go through the website, Twitter. I'll try to make my email available. Maybe we can make that as a link here also. And unless there's any other further questions, I think we're good.
All righty.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care.